Imagine being trapped at the bottom of a pitch-black ocean with not a single ray of light to accompany you. Above you are millions of tons of water crushing down. All around you is emptiness, and the only one who can hear you at your lowest point is God. In this modern era, we often feel like we're drowning in a similar sea of despair. Life's problems, depression, failure, and worldly pressures seem to swallow us alive into a dark abyss. However, long before modern humans knew the concept of clinical depression or extreme isolation, there was a select few who experienced the most terrifying isolation in the history of civilization. This is not just an outdated myth, but a historical record of the toughest psychological test and a miracle that broke the boundaries of the laws of physics. This is a true story of survival in 3 layers of darkness.
The story begins in Nineveh, a vast ancient city in Mesopotamia, now in modern-day Iraq. It was a prosperous center of civilization, yet filled with arrogance and utter moral decay. Its inhabitants were drowning in wealth, injustice, and idolatry. A messenger named Yunus was sent into this noisy, sinful city. For years, he stood amidst ridicule, trying to rekindle the light of truth in the hearts of his people. Every day, he faced rejection, ridicule, and threats that drained his energy and his mental energy. No one listened, no one cared. Frustration began to build within him, creating the first layer of darkness in his mind, the darkness of despair toward his own people.
As a mere human with limited emotional endurance, his mental exhaustion reached its peak. He felt his efforts were futile, and without waiting for official orders from the Creator, he decided to leave the city. He thought that by moving away from the source of his troubles, he would find peace. This is a portrait of the psychological escape we often experience today. When the pressure feels too much, our first instinct is to run away, disappear, and find a place where no one knows us. With a heart filled with anger and disappointment, he walked away from the city gates of Nineveh, leaving his people on the brink of destruction, unaware that this escape would lead him to a test far more terrifying than anything he could have ever imagined. His journey took him to a busy harbor where the ocean waves seemed calm and promised freedom. He boarded a wooden sailing ship crowded with passengers and merchandise. As the ship slowly left the harbor, a small sense of relief filled his heart. The sea air seemed to wash away his burdens for a moment. However, that peace was only a temporary illusion. Often, when we try to escape destiny or unfinished responsibilities, the universe has a unique way of bringing us back. The once clear sky was slowly covered by thick, black clouds. The once friendly wind turned into a cold, bone-chilling gust. The escape he thought was a way out instead became the gateway to the darkest point in his life. Suddenly, an unexpected storm struck the ship with incredible force. Howling gales tore at the sails, and hill-high waves rolled and tossed the wooden hull as if it were a mere toy in the fury of nature. Night fell swiftly, obscuring the view with a thick darkness. This was the first layer of darkness, the darkness of night, surrounded by a deadly storm. The passengers screamed in panic, throwing all their belongings overboard in an attempt to lighten the ship's load. But the ship continued to drift, teetering on the brink of destruction. Amidst the deafening chaos, they believed in ancient superstition that this terrible storm must have been caused by someone among them fleeing the wrath of their god. Desperate to save the ship from sinking, the passengers decided to draw names to determine who would be sacrificed and thrown into the raging sea. The first draw was made, and the result was the messenger. Knowing him to be a good man, they rejected the result and repeated the draw a second time. Once again, the name that came up was his. Still doubtful, they drew a third time, and fate was undeniable. The same name came up. At that moment, a sharp realization struck him. He knew full well that this storm was no ordinary natural phenomenon. It was a direct rebuke from the Creator for his emotional decision. Without resistance, he prepared to face the most deadly consequences. With heavy steps, filled with profound resignation, He walked to the edge of the ship's deck. Below him, a deadly black whirlpool opened its jaws wide, ready to swallow anything that fell within. He closed his eyes, let his body fall through the cold night air, and plunged into the icy waters. Instantly, the din of wind and human screams vanished, replaced by a muffled roar from the depths of the ocean. He began to sink deeper and deeper, pulled by gravity toward the bottom of the ocean beyond. It was a transition into a dimension of pure despair, where every bond with the surface world, every hope of human rescue, was irrevocably severed. He was now alone on the open sea.
As his body drifts down toward the ocean floor, we enter the second layer of darkness, the pitch-black darkness of the ocean floor. Light from the surface is completely unable to penetrate these depths. The water pressure begins to increase drastically, crushing his chest with incredible force. Herein lies a metaphor that is highly relevant to human psychological suffering. When we hit rock bottom, the world around us feels pitch black. The pressure of our problems suffocates us, and we feel like we are sinking without a bottom to stand on. A chill creeps into his soul. In these endless depths of the ocean, logically speaking, humanity should be finished. There is no technology, no light, and no oxygen. It is a sentence of absolute death.
But just as he was resigned to death in the dark waters, something immense and terrifying surged from the abyss. On the direct command of the Lord of the universe, a giant whale the size of a hill swam through the darkness and swallowed him alive. The fish's massive teeth passed through his body without breaking a single sliver of skin or breaking a single bone. The enormous jaws snapped shut, locking him in a biological prison that traveled across the ocean floor. This was the third layer of darkness and the most terrifying, the utter darkness within the belly of the sea monster. A fishy stench, gastric juices, and a complete lack of space greeted him in the most unimaginable isolation on Earth.
Trapped in a cramped, stuffy, pitch-black space and constantly drifting aimlessly at the bottom of the ocean. 3 layers of darkness now completely envelop him. The darkness of night, the darkness of the deep ocean, and the darkness within the belly of a giant creature. Psychologically, this represents the most extreme depression and anxiety. Being in such a confined space, unable to see where one is going, not knowing when this suffering will end, and being completely isolated from the outside world. The mind of an ordinary human being would immediately collapse and go insane within hours if faced with such absolute isolation. Here, all human arrogance and ego are crushed to dust, leaving behind the pure essence of one's servitude in the vast universe.
In that suffocating darkness and solitude, he did not cry out in condemnation of his fate. He did not blame God for the punishment he received, and he did not cry out for a human being who could never hear him. Instead, he turned to the depths of his heart. He realized the root of all this disaster: his ego, his impatience, and his negligence in carrying out his mandate. When a human being has been stripped of all forms of worldly power, when money, position, relationships, and logic can no longer help, the only lifeline left is total surrender to the infinite. In the silence of the whale's belly, as it slithered through the cold seabed, from pale, trembling lips, a confession was uttered that would change the history of humanity.
There's no God but you. Glory be to you. Indeed, I was among the wrongdoers. A perfect confession of guilt. These rosary beads were not just a string of words. They were a high-level spiritual frequency, born of pure despair that had been transformed into absolute surrender. He did not demand to be immediately released from the whale's belly. He simply acknowledged the greatness of his God and admitted his own guilt. True psychological recovery began from this point: acceptance of one's own guilt without looking for scapegoats. The words were repeated over and over, echoing within the fleshy prison, creating invisible waves of spiritual energy that radiated outward through the thick flesh and bones of the ocean giant.
A physical and spiritual miracle occurred.
The frequency of prayer from the lowest point on Earth spread upward, penetrating the layers of dense ocean darkness, shattering the silence of the night storm, and soaring through the dimensions of the heavens. The celestial entities were shocked to hear a very familiar voice, yet originating from a most unexpected dimension. They recognized the voice as belonging to a servant who diligently gave thanks in his free time, but now it sounded softly from the belly of the sea monster. Logic and the laws of physics lost their relevance before the absolute will of the Creator. Because he always remembered God in times of happiness, God lifted him up when he was at his most difficult. The sea giant was ordered to move to the surface.
The ocean giant swam to the desolate shoreline, opened its massive jaws, and vomited its exhausted passenger onto the barren sand. After being trapped for so long in stomach acid and absolute darkness, his physical condition was at its weakest. His skin blistered and his body trembled with pain. The morning sun stung his defenseless skin. However, the blessing of protection did not stop at the bottom of the sea. Suddenly, from the barren ground, a vine with broad leaves quickly grew, shading him from the sun's heat. Its fruit nourished him, and its shade healed his physical wounds. Slowly but surely, the darkness vanished, replaced by a divine healing light that revitalized his soul and mind.
After a full recovery, he was ordered to return to Nineveh, the city he had so emotionally left. But this time, he returned with a spiritual maturity forged at the bottom of the ocean. Amazingly, by the time he arrived, hundreds of thousands of the city's inhabitants had repented and come to faith following the natural signs they had witnessed. This extraordinary story of the Prophet Jonah leaves a lasting legacy for us in the modern era. No matter how deep our depression, no matter how dark our problems are, there is always a way out. The key is to subdue our ego, acknowledge our weaknesses, and pray sincerely. If God can save one life from the 3 layers of darkness at the bottom of the ocean, he can certainly rescue us from the darkness of our lives today.